Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. I hope you like this video. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think about this movie, about this release, about this Blu-ray label, about this insane year of 2024 that we are living in, where there are just so many releases coming out nonstop that it's almost hard to keep up with. I mean, I would argue it is way too hard to keep up with it. It's almost hard to keep up with even knowing what is coming out, is what I meant to say. Like, forget trying to buy them all, trying to watch them all. Even knowing what is coming is proving to be too much for me. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about Motorway. This is from Chameleon Film. So this film was originally released in June of 2012, and then it was released in May of 2024 by Chameleon Films, which is a company out of Australia. This is a freaking phenomenal movie. I had never seen it before. It is a Milky Way movie. That is Johnnie To's company. It was produced by Johnnie To. Excuse me. A little bit of a frog in my throat today. And it was directed by Soi Chung, who's having a moment right now because he directed the Walled In, the Kowloon City movie that's out right now, that's doing a lot of business all around the world. And he also directed Limbo, which I have not seen yet, but is a movie a lot of people really, really love. A copy of it on Blu-ray and 4K was sent to me, and I will be watching that soon. I've heard there's a scene in there I will really need to skip based on my personal sensibilities and what I do and don't like to watch in movies, but I'm really looking forward to that film. He also directed SPL 2. So that's probably my favorite movie in the series, Killzone 2, SPL 2. I love that movie. And I was really impressed by the directing when I first saw that movie, the attention to character, the deliberate pacing of it, the way the story unfolded, the visual design. I thought it was a really freaking well-made movie, and I've been wanting to see more of his stuff since then and just really never really compelled myself to do so. And now I'm finally doing that, and I'm really glad I checked this movie out because this movie was awesome, and this is a freaking great release too. So this movie was written by, this is worth pointing out because this will come up when I talk about the bonus material. Bonus material on here is incredible, by the way. There's like 9 interviews or something like that. Let me count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 interviews, and they total like, I think, well over an hour. There's multiple hours of bonus material on here. So you get a lot of bang for your buck with this release. It was written by Joey O'Brien, Zato Kam Yoon, and Francis Fung. Anthony Wong is in this movie. Sean Yu is in this movie. Gordon Lam, Guo Zhangdong, Barbie Su, Josie Ho, Michelle Ye, and various others. Chin Carlock did the action for this film, who you'll be familiar with if you watch a lot of Hong Kong films because he's a very famous action director, action choreographer, worked with all of the names that you will think of when you think of action in Hong Kong cinema. And like I said, produced by Johnnie To. So a basic plot overview of this movie is you have a young cop played by Sean Yu, he's like a traffic cop. So he's on like really boring traffic duty with Anthony Wong. But he's kind of this like adrenaline drunky guy who really likes cars, and he likes racing cars and like souping cars up and stuff like that. And they end up getting a case with these criminals who, like, a major element of what they do is being really, really good drivers. What's really interesting about this movie is that it basically becomes like this existential thing of the cars and the driving. And I don't want to like get too much into that right now, but like a basic overview of the plot is 2 cops. Anthony Wong is the mentor. We eventually find out that there's some stuff from Anthony Wong's past that is coming back to haunt him, kind of like classic, like older cop, younger cop type of stuff, right? Like almost film noir, like Mike and Arna in their commentary track call this a neo-noir movie. But this is very much like a thriller driving movie with lots of car action, lots of car chases and stuff like that. Like there's some really incredible slow motion stuff in here. Car stuff is really well directed, but it is worth it to know that this is not like a Fast and Furious style, like crazy car action movie. This is a movie in which the thing that is being focused on the most by the writer, the director, the actors, and everyone like that, which we know because we have all these interviews, right, is character. How is character portrayed through the action of the driving and the narrative arc of the film? Essentially, like, who are these people? How do they exist in this world? How do they relate to one another? And how do they change and grow over the course of the events of this film while the cops are trying to catch these criminals in a way that is deeply rooted in the act of like driving through the city? Okay, so let me get into my thoughts on this. This is really great visual filmmaking, and this is pure cinema, I think, in multiple ways. One, there's not a lot of like explaining of plot and character in this film. There are some scenes like that, but this is very much like a Milky Way style narrative, a Johnnie To style narrative. What do I mean by that? If you look at a movie like Election, if you look at a movie like Exile, Drug War, like a lot of these incredible classic like 5-star Johnnie To movies, the what you are learning about character, the story, the evolution of the characters, their relationships to one another, the world in which they exist, the way that the movie moves from the beginning to the ending it's not something that someone sits down and tells you. It's something that you watch, observe, and learn, right? And so it's told visually and it's told through character. You don't have scenes in these movies. And Infernal Affairs is a very famous movie that a lot of people probably would have seen, that I think has a very similar narrative style. You don't have a lot of scenes in these movies where people sit down and tell you what is going on, right? This is a very Western narrative technique. It's a very American thing, right? Where you have these scenes in American thrillers and action movies and stuff like that, where the character will actually tell you, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is why we're going to do it. This is what's going to happen if we don't successfully do it, right? And what does that do? That essentially creates expectation for the audience. And when you have expectation, you have a hope and a fear. You hope that something will be successful. You fear that it won't be. That creates tension for the audience, right? And so that type of filmmaking is used very commonly in American commercial cinema, because American commercial cinema is trying to hook the audience and drag you through an experience. This movie is much more of like you sit down and you come to the experience. The experience immerses you through the visuals, through the movement. I mean, like I said, pure cinema, and I don't just mean that in terms of it being a visually told story without a lot of explaining. It's pure cinema too, because it's cars, and cars move, and cinema is movement. Cinema is exciting. It is light. It is sound. It is action. Like, though that pure motion, like I think Jackie Chan and Tony Jaa, people like that, I think that's pure cinema too, right? Because it's using the medium of cinema to articulate something that is very pure, that is very physical and visual and auditory, that you cannot really get through a similar experience of like reading a book or going to see a play or something like that, right? It is pure to cinema, and it is a pure expression of the potential of cinema as a medium. And this has both of those. It has the action and it has the pure visual storytelling. The narrative here is not particularly innovative, right? It's like an old cop and a young cop, and it's a mentor-mentee relationship, which goes all the way back to like 1949, Kurosawa with Stray Dog and stuff like that, and probably even before that, right? Like into the 30s with film noir and stuff like that. But you have this basic setup of like the mentor cop, the mentee cop. One is arrogant and young and like wants to, like change and run the world, and one is older and a little bit more resigned and a little bit wiser, but also a little bit less likely to try to do anything good for the better of other people because they're so jaded, right? And then you have, the criminals who they're after, and they're very bad guys. And it's not a particularly original story. What I think is so good about this movie is how well it is told and how unique the telling of it is. And it makes me think of something that one of my professors used to say to us when I was in grad school. I went to grad school for screenwriting, and he would say that movies are basically sausage, right? They're all about the same size. You know what you're going to get when you get it. They all kind of look the same. They use the same casing. You buy them at the same store and all that stuff, right? What makes it interesting and what makes it unique is the ingredients that you put into it. And this is very much like a great example, I think, of that axiom, that maxim, whatever you want to call it, that he used to tell us, right? That this is a generic type of movie that is a very, very good film because it is very, very well told. Now, it is worth mentioning, this is a very like male-heavy, masculine movie about dudes driving cars, right? I actually wrote down while I was watching it, Johnny Bro, because there are some aspects of this film that are very similar to Johnny To's style, but Soi Chang definitely establishes himself as a unique directorial voice and with a unique vision and stuff like that. But it's a very like kind of bro-heavy movie with like bros driving around in cars, and like a lot of the plot devices revolve around like they have to be able to do certain things in the car, and he can't do that. But that's where the existential thing comes in, right? Is the guy has to be able to do a certain type of move in this car. And I won't spoil it for you because it's part of the plot, right? And until he can get to the point where he can do that, which is a kind of a thing of you have to turn off your intellectual mind and communicate directly with the car and like just kind of feel it and experience it, right? This is where you start to get into the existential metaphors. I actually wrote down in my notes while I was watching this movie that there's an element of it that kind of reminds me of The Unfettered Mind. The Unfettered Mind is a book written by a guy who was a samurai but also like a Buddhist. His name was Tako on Soho. This was like hundreds of years ago. It's a Japanese book, right? And the point of the book is that, he says, I think in the opening paragraph, like once your mind stops, that is when you die. And he's talking about fighting as like a samurai. Like when you stop to think about something, your flow is dead, right? And you're no longer existing in the moment of the duel, and your opponent then has the upper hand, right? And I was thinking about this with the relationship to driving too. Like when you're just driving, when it's pure and you're not self-conscious and you're not thinking about it and you're just doing it, that's like pure raw existence. And when you start to think too much about it, when you start to step on your own toes, when you start to worry about the things that are around you, it's not that you shouldn't do that, right? Because these are things that are necessary in certain circumstances. That's when the unadulterated experience is interrupted and it becomes something else. So it's like this very kind of existential thing of like the car, the road, movement, existence, life. Now, interestingly, I was writing this down while I was watching the movie, and then Soi Chang, the director, says in his interview that's on here that what was so interesting to him about this film, and one of the things that he really gravitated towards as the director, is this idea that everyone has to deal, like every character in this movie gets in a car and drives at some point. And the movie is not about cars, it is about the drivers and how they drive. And so it's about life and the way that people navigate life and the way that different personality types and different types of people react to life as it is happening to them. And I thought that was a really interesting, I mean, obviously he articulated that very well because I got that while I was watching the film. And it's a really interesting way, I think, to approach this type of material. There's just one other thing that I wanted to mention. There's a parking garage scene in this movie that is so freaking good. Now, there are so many amazing parking garage scenes in Hong Kong cinema, which you'll know if you're a fan. Like there's the famous one comes to mind immediately in The Killer. There's also the really incredible one in A Better Tomorrow with Mark Gore. And there's just a lot of like really freaking good parking garage scenes in Hong Kong cinema. And I don't know if that's because they're like, I mean, righting wrongs, right? With the fight scene with the baseball bats. I don't know if that's because they're like easy locations to get because maybe there's a lot of them in the city and they're not heavily policed, or like you can go in at night and there's no one there and you can film. I don't know why, but there are a lot of really freaking good parking garage scenes. But this one is like transcendently incredible. Like it takes a closed location and you think, okay, they're going to go into this parking garage. You know, the cars are going to find each other. There's going to be a chase on the street. The parking garage scene just keeps going. And it's like a huge component of the third act of this film. And there is so much tension that is mined from cars and people being in parking garage, trying to find each other, trying to catch each other, trying to chase each other in these really tiny little spaces. It's like really genuinely incredible. So look out for that scene when you watch this movie. So there is so much bonus material out here. It is insane. There's an interview with the associate producer whose name is, I wrote it down and I can't read my own handwriting, so I'm going to read it off of the back of the case here. Ding Yun Shan. He was a producer for Milky Way, and then he retired because he got burnt out, and he was working as a film professor, and they asked him to come back to produce this movie. They had a director attached to it, and that director thought, with the budget that you're giving me, I can't do a car movie like this, and that director basically walked away. Soi Chang was someone who was looking for a breakout film, like a creative breakout as a director, and had been in the industry for a while. And one of the reasons they thought he would be good for this movie, which I thought was really cool, is that he had been an assistant director for Ringo Lam. And Ringo Lam was known for doing like crazy car stunts. So like, okay, this guy will at least know what he's doing with the car stuff. Maybe he can handle a low budget. And so he talks about bringing him in, suggesting him to Johnnie To as the director. And then he talks about how they had this script, but it was written by an American guy or a British guy. His name is Joey O'Brien. And so they had to have it rewritten to make it more authentic to Hong Kong. And then while they were making the movie, Drive came out with Ryan Gosling, obviously, the Nick Refn film, excuse me. And that movie played at a festival, and Johnnie To was one of the jurors at the festival. So he went to the festival, saw the movie, and came back, and they were like, ooh, do we have to be worried? Like, are we making the same movie? And he's like, don't worry about it. Just make your movie. But that was pretty interesting to hear about. So that's a great interview. 35 minutes, like I said. Javier Jameau is a French name. Sorry, I don't speak French. It's a 15-minute long interview. He's the composer. So he talks about how he knew the French distributor for Milky Way, and they recommended him to Milky Way as a composer. And he was living and working in France, and obviously they're in Hong Kong, and like everything was done via email and telephone. And he's like, there were like some weird communication problems at first, and like we had to kind of get on the same footing, and like it was a rocky relationship, but then it settled into something really, really nice and positive. And he didn't meet Johnnie To until like years later when Johnnie To came to Berlin for the Berlin Film Festival. The guy like took the train to Berlin or whatever to meet him there. So it's really interesting. And he kind of talks through his whole relationship with Milky Way and stuff like that. Sean Yu, who's the lead in the film, is about an 11-minute long interview. He talks about how like he was kind of fed up with playing cop characters. He thought he had played like every type of cop he could possibly play, but he was really attracted to the material in this film. He thought it was a really interesting concept, and he also really liked the relationship between that character and the Anthony Wong character. So he was kind of drawn to it and compelled to do it because of that. Barbie Sue has a 4-minute long interview in here. She's not in the movie that much, and it's actually really interesting because she talks in her interview about how she's not in the movie that much and how she didn't like, she had to interpret a kind of enigmatic character who doesn't get a lot of screen time, but kind of understand how that character affects the plot, even though she's not in it a lot. That was very interesting. Anthony Wong, 8-minute and 20-minute long interview, or 8-minute, 20-second long interview, excuse me. One of the things I thought was fascinating about Anthony Wong's interview is that he talks about how he didn't do any research for this movie because he's playing a traffic cop, but he's like, I don't know what traffic cops actually do, but I would bet they're not doing what they do in this movie. Because he's like, this movie is very much like its own world, and it exists in and of itself. And like, what I need to understand is what a traffic cop does in this world and who this character is and how that affects my journey and the other characters. I don't need to go and hang out with an actual traffic cop and like figure out the minutia of their job, right? I thought that was like a really interesting perspective. The director has a 22-minute long interview on here, which is awesome. He talks a lot about the characters. You can tell he's very invested and rooted in the character experience and the way that the audience will understand these characters. He talks about them individually. He talks about their relationships to one another. He talks about their relationships to driving, what driving means to him in this film, what the drivers mean to him in this film in terms of their like existential experience of life and stuff like that. He talks a lot about the simplicity of the story and how that was very important to them because it would allow them to focus on other aspects of the film and make it like a very pure kind of direct experience of a movie. He talks about the prep work that they did. And then Johnnie To. So there's a 3-minute long Johnnie To interview on here. He talks about Soi Chang's sensibilities as a director, which is really interesting to hear. Obviously, Johnnie To is like one of the great directors ever, right? So to hear him talk about another director's sensibilities is really cool. And he talks about his commitment to character and how the movie is not about stunts and it's not about car crashes and chases. It's about character and how that relates to the action of the film. And then we have Mike and Arna commentary track. They're always very fun to listen to. There's a lot of great banter on here. They love this movie. They describe it as neo-noir. They talk about the police public relations board, which apparently was a big thing in Hong Kong at some point that figures into the plot of this film. So that was really interesting to hear about. Lots of Sean Yu, like they talk about his stories about him, knowing him, his career, the trajectory of his career, like lots of great information about him because I don't really know that much about him. So that was great. Lots of great location information. And then one thing I thought was really fun about the commentary track, if I understand this correctly, if I'm remembering the commentary track, Mike Leader talks about stumbling out of a bar drunk at like 3 a.m. and they were filming some of the car chase scenes from this movie just like on the street. So he just stood there drunk and watched them for a while. And that sounds like a lot of fun. I also realized I didn't show you the physical release. So you get a slipcase here and that pulls out and then you get the movie here, or the plastic case, I should say. And then here's your Blu-ray disc, and then here's your essays, and there are multiple essays in here, also worth pointing out. So Fast Times in Hong Kong by Gary Bettison, which is a kind of analysis of the film, and he talks about various other. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I watched this movie like a month ago, and then I've been like sick, and I had an injury, and I had all this crap happening at work, and like it took me forever to record this. So I read these when I watched the movie, and I'm not going to lie, I don't 100% remember them, but I do remember thinking that they were really interesting, getting a lot of titles of films I hadn't seen before that I wanted to see, and learning about stunt work and cars and stuff like that in the history of Hong Kong cinema. And then there's an interview with the screenwriter here. So you can't go wrong with that. It's always great to hear things straight from the horse's mouth. And then, of course, me being a writer, I also love reading interviews with writers. And there you go. So that's the booklet. So it's Motorway. I moved this into my top 4 on Letterboxd after I watched it. It's such a good movie. It has such a unique style. It's really interesting to see that Johnnie To Milky Way style applied to something that's much more like loud and aggressive as a car movie, right? Because Johnnie To's movies are often, even with all the shootouts and the action stuff, his movies are often relatively subdued. And so it's kind of hard to make a subdued car movie because cars are loud and they're fast and they're violent and like, and so it's a really cool combo of those kind of different styles. But it's just like really freaking well made film. That was I was most impressed by just how damn well made this movie was and how engrossed I was from the beginning until the end of it. So it's Motorway. My name is Will. You are watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.